My friend Colin Plume from Noble Gold Investments just released his new book, Silver is the New Oil. And it says if you don't own silver yet, you're already behind. Colin says that as demand for technology, energy, and industry soars, silver's value is set to surge. The question is, are you ready to profit? This book reveals why silver is the most underrated asset today and how to invest before the world catches on. I've read Silver is the New Oil, and you should too. Get it now, available on Amazon. Yesterday, I had a very moving day, and one that I don't take for granted. Yesterday, I was in the White House, which thankfully I've been there a few times since President Trump has won the election. But I was able to visit what could be called the most sacred ground of the American government. The place where so many decisions have been made, where war has been waged, where the highest decisions of the land culminate. I've been there a couple times before, but visiting it yesterday was very moving. And that, of course, is the Oval Office. Let's please show pictures of this, guys. Walking into the Oval Office and into the cabinet room with President Trump was overwhelming. It was larger than life. Every time I walk into the Oval Office, and it's only been a couple times, it does take your breath away. What President Trump has done with it is remarkable. It has really turned into a museum. I got to see the original copy of the Declaration of Independence. Amazing photos lining the entire Oval, from William Henry Harrison to James Polk. In fact, when President Trump was showing me around, he pointed at James Polk and he says, you know, James Polk is one of the most underrated presidents in history. I said, well, tell me why, Mr. President. He says, well, he didn't do much, except he did add California and Texas. So that's quite a legacy. It's like, I could see the gears grinding there. There is a aura when you walk into the Oval Office, and it was not lost on me how things have changed so dramatically and how we should be filled with gratitude and awe and wonder to Lord Almighty. The mystique that you get when you enter into the Oval Office, it is larger than life. It is one that is sacred ground in our nation. Today is Thursday, May 29th. Exactly 1 year ago today, President Donald Trump's jury deliberations started in the criminal trial in New York. Exactly 1 year ago today, President Trump was in what he called the icebox. Remember, they had quarantined President Trump where he could not raise money. He could not travel the country. He could not campaign. The trial began on April 15th, 2024. And it ended on May 30th, 2024. I want you to think about where we were a year ago. A year ago, Biden was beating President Trump in many of the polls. A year ago, our border was completely and totally wide open. President Trump was largely gagged by the judge. President Donald Trump turned those press gaggles into campaign opportunities, which was incredibly impressive. Remember these famous pictures of President Trump who had to sit through this ridiculous Moscow show trial. And the people on the left thought they had him dead to rights. They thought the movement would betray him. They thought putting him in a courtroom, which was only happening a year ago today. It feels like it's been 5 years. And then tomorrow will be the 1 year anniversary of when he's actually, quote unquote, found guilty on the fake 34 accounts. A year ago, the media insisted that Biden was still totally healthy. And it was misleading videos and cheap fakes that were suggesting otherwise. Now, Jake Tapper is writing an entire book on how the media got it wrong. How did President Trump ascend from facing 700 years in federal prison, having to sit in the icebox, where the entire system crashed down upon him. I love that picture. Can we go back to the picture of J.D. Vance there, please? Remember, this is J.D. Vance looking on President Trump before he was chosen as Vice President of the United States. Look at that foreshadowing right there. I love that picture. We should get that picture framed in our office. Because very few U.S. senators, I think I see the great Tommy Tuberville there, but very few U.S. senators actually visited President Trump when he was in trial. J.D. Vance did. Here's just some of the media commentary of what was happening a year ago. There were cheers in the Biden headquarters when President Trump was found to be a felon. Remember, we were still running against Joe Biden a year ago. Play cut 307.
So our team has heard that there were cheers inside the Biden headquarters in Wilmington as the verdict was read. Look, President Biden has been very careful in the last weeks not to comment on this trial. That, I have been told, will now change now that we have a verdict. Obviously, these guilty verdicts are a political gift to Democrats, a political gift to the president. He is now running against a convicted felon.
They really thought it was going to work. They were all in on, hey, we can now change the title on his driver's license. Convicted felon President Donald Trump. They spent millions to try to get that soundbite, convicted felon. Remember when James Comey was saying they could accommodate the incarceration of a sitting president? They'd kind of figure out there's got to be a way to do this security-wise. A year ago, our movement was still in the wilderness, but we had a leader, and we had you. As I walked into the Oval Office yesterday, I was so thankful for all of you that stood by this program and were in the trenches the last couple of years. Not just was President Trump on trial a year ago, think about 3 years ago. Think about the spring of 2022. We didn't have access to most social media. X and the Twitter thing was just finally popping up and finally happening. We were censored, we were muzzled, we were in the wilderness. And to march all the way back to the Oval Office is awe-inspiring, and it takes your breath away. It goes to show, despite all of the machinations of the unelected administrative state. And look at that contrast. We should tweet that out, guys. How a year ago you're in a courtroom, and a year later, you're in the cabinet room. From the courtroom to the cabinet room. And they did everything they possibly could to stop that from happening. They tried to humiliate him by making him sit there and read off all the charges and all the testimonies. They were trying to break the will of all of you, and yet they underestimated the strength and the durability and the anti-fragile element of this movement. The more pressure that was applied to all of you, the more pressure that was applied to us, the stronger we got. It is a very unique American phenomenon. You do not find this in most European countries. You do not find this in most places across the world. The goal was to demoralize us and to get us to give up. Instead, we rallied to greater heights than ever before. Where people are going to say, this is outrageous. You're going to try to put a political leader in prison because you're afraid that he'll beat you in an election. And it turns out all of their fears were warranted. It turns out they were right to do this in a sense. From politics, it was wrong morally. But if they could try to prevent him from running because they knew that the movement was coming, because they could not win you over. They could not win the debate. They could not win on the facts. They could not win on the merits. They had to use leg irons, handcuffs, shackles, courtrooms, and prison sentences. So it's not a straight line for President Trump to fulfill his mandate. There will be setbacks, injunctions, political and cultural brawls, but there's a big difference. Now we have the power. And a year ago, he was in a courtroom, and Biden was chuckling, eating his ice cream, not really sure what was going on. And now we have President Trump in the Oval Office, full steam ahead, and now the Democrats are in the wilderness.